Dr. Cremo, just to ask you a question right off the bat is,
Yeah, right.
while we're waiting for that to be done, we had you on the panel the other day with
Yeah,
I believe it was Dr. Sam, a couple of other people talking about the pyramids themselves, right? We're looking at so many different aspects of the pyramids in Giza. What do you feel is the main function? And it's just your point of view of those specific pyramids. What do you feel is the main cause or functionality of them?
well, I'm not a pyramid researcher, so anything I say about it would just be my opinion as a person who's just encountered whatever I've heard. So I haven't really looked into it, as a matter of research and trying to understand myself about it. But they, it depends upon your whole worldview. I accept a consciousness based universe rather than a matter based universe. So I connect uh, things like this with things that other people might consider to be unscientific or uh, uh, if we look at the Egyptian cosmology, like many other cosmologies in the world, they accepted there was a an overall guiding intelligence that was responsible for the manifestation of the whole universe and everything in it, and that there were different personalities involved. They had different names for these personalities: Osiris, Isis, Newt. They had different names for them. So I think their pyramid was a method of connecting consciousness on this planet with the larger spiritual consciousness or that function in the universe. And how the pyramids were constructed and what their purpose was has to be understood in that context rather than just looking at it in terms of, well, there are these blocks of limestone that were somehow or other carved out of some quarry some distance away, and somehow or other, mechanically, according to the laws of physics, they had to be transported and lifted and set in place, at the Giza Plateau. There may have been other powers involved, like a few centuries ago, some of the scholars, Islamic scholars in Egypt, they were saying, well, these pyramids were made by King Solomon, and he used jinn. Uh, in other words, some kind of magical or mystical beings to manifest them. So I I think that has to be taken into account, that there may have been some powers involved in the construction and the conceptualization and the use of the pyramids. I I think they were uh, used to establish connections and communications between humans on this planet and higher dimensions, higher beings, extraterrestrial beings, extra dimensional beings. And they had some purpose for uh, equalizing or adjusting or harmonizing the energies on this level with energies of higher and lower levels of reality, because they had a concept of the underworld as well. And they also had a concept of transmigration of the conscious self or soul. So, yeah, sometimes it's difficult to, for a group of people who exist later after the original culture has dissipated and gone to fully comprehend what uh, what that other culture may have actually been all about. So,
Right. And you talk about, especially in your work, the de-evolution of the human kind of the human species as we get through. Your presentation did come up here, and
uh,
we're going to bring it up in 2 seconds. But that de-evolution, if we're talking about ancient Egypt and when those pyramids were probably built, we would have probably been maybe on a higher edge of that before that drastic downfall, coming in the later years. But let's get into the presentation itself. I'm going to do this. And now, Dr. Cremo, do you see up there where it says next slide, slide one? You can
uh,
click the arrows to go to the next slide. Do you see that?
no, I
If
don't.
you hover your mouse on the
Oh,
screen,
there it
Dr.
is,
Cremo,
down
you'll
there.
see it as well.
Okay, I see it. Yeah.
Also, if you hover your mouse on the main screen, you'll see the slide thing pop up, and you'll be able to control it from there as well.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. So, of course, we were talking about something very interesting there. I mean, you were talking about the downfall. Uh, I think you're absolutely right about that. Because if we look back around 5,000 years at all the various cultures around the world, uh, and we see that they had some very common features. The idea that as conscious, intelligent, personal, individual beings, we're not from this world of matter, we're from some higher realm of non material substance. That's our original home, and we're part of a whole cosmic hierarchy of beings. And the self, the conscious self, the soul, doesn't become extinguished at the time of death. So they all tended to have ideas like that. And they were talking about connections between human society and these higher dimensional beings. They were regularly visited by them and communicated with them. But that all seemed to stop about 5,000 years ago or so, which kind of corresponds with the Hindu idea of cyclical time, that they're yugas that pass one age to the other. And there was a change in the yugas where things dropped to a lower energy level on this planet, which resulted in people becoming more concentrated on trying to dominate, control, and exploit the resources of this planet in competition with each other, which we see still going on today. So their attention was focused elsewhere, not on their connection with the whole cosmos, but with a very narrow focus on their own uh, desires to dominate, control, and exploit others and the resources of nature. And those connections between human society on this planet and the extraterrestrial or extra dimensional elements was left aside. So, but to get that's part of what I mean by devolution. Can I go back to the slides now? Do I just click on the, okay. So that's what I had prepared for today. And sometimes people ask me, well, why a spiritual perspective? Why is it necessary? Isn't science enough? And why, in particular, a Vedic perspective? And that's because I am, like many of you are, a transcultural person. Now, to be trans anything is difficult, and transcultural is also difficult. A little bit of my personal history. And you go back to the 1960s, I was part of American Cold War culture. My father was an intelligence officer in the Air Force. I went to school, went to the university. I was preparing for a similar career in one of the intelligence services or the diplomatic service, the State Department. But after a couple of years at the university in those days, I became a little bit radicalized. I became part of the counterculture. And even that really didn't completely satisfy me. I won't go into all the reasons for that, but I wanted to turn on a more spiritual path. So I became a disciple of a guru from India, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. And today I'm kind of a transcultural hybrid, integrating East and West and science and spirituality. And I think many of you also have an experience like that, that you're taking elements from different cultures, different worldviews, and blending them in with the culture and values with which you were connected through family, society, nation, and so on. It's a big feature of our world today where communication is facilitated by things like the internet and the ability to travel widely. So what I'm really interested in is the question of human origins, and the Vedic teachings, especially the Puranas, or the historical writings of ancient India, talk about human populations that have existed on this planet for many millions of years. Now, that's quite different from the picture of human origins that we get from modern science, which tells us that humans like us first appeared between 200,000 and maybe 300,000 years ago, having evolved from more primitive ape-like human ancestors. I think there's a lot of evidence that contradicts that. There's many discoveries of human bones, human artifacts, and human footprints going back tens of millions, even hundreds of millions of years are there in the original scientific literature, although we don't hear very much about it today. So I collected all those reports in this book, Forbidden Archaeology. And I would say that this evidence isn't well known because of a process of knowledge filtration that operates in the world of science. And this evidence, it contradicts this widely accepted theory, which means we need new explanations for human origins. But what I proposed in this book was that before we even ask the question, where did human beings come from? We should first of all ask the question, what is a human being? So that's an ontological question. What are we? Today, many scientists are going to say, we're just a machine made of matter. That's because their ontology, the ontology of modern science, is materialist. They think matter is the only thing that we should be concerned about. They say, well, we're machines made of molecules. This implies that life came into existence when in some ocean water a few billion years ago, the chemicals combined to form some self-reproducing organism, and somehow they say that it happened, but they can't say how it happened. It's an unsolved problem in modern science. It's, as you can see from this quote from a recent scientific paper. And then once you have some small, even if you grant, you can get some small one-celled creature, how did all these different body types of so many types of plants and animals come into existence? They say it happened by evolution, but there's no real detailed scientific explanation how that happened. Again, this is one of the unsolved problems in biology. Like this article says, foremost among the unresolved problems confronting modern biology is the origin of biological complexity, most notably the shape and form of our own bodies. So then there's the question of consciousness. Most scientists say it's produced by chemicals in the brain, but they've never shown exactly how. So I would say the materialist ontology, this idea that everything can be explained by transformations of molecules, is a failed ontology. They can't explain the origin of life by it. They can't explain the origin of species. They can't explain the origin of consciousness. Now, they may say, well, but we're trying and we will figure it out. And they'll just stick to the same ontology that's failed in the past and hope that it'll be successful in the future. But another approach is to change the ontology. And many scientists have kind of come to that conclusion when they've reached a dead end in their attempts to explain everything by combinations of matter. Some of them are thinking, like Rodney Brooks of the Artificial Life Lab at MIT, there might be some extra sort of stuff in living systems outside our current understanding. And among the possibilities he mentioned were some ineffable entities such as the soul or elan vital, the vital force. And you have other modern academics like Thomas Nagel in his book, Mind and Cosmos, who says, we really have to take this seriously, that modern science can't explain consciousness. It's conscious subjects and their mental lives are inescapable components of reality not describable by the physical sciences. So, what is a human being? A human being is not just a collection of molecules, not just a purely material being. Matter is there, yes, but beyond that, there is a subtle mind element, a mental body, and there's also the spiritual body, which is the source of consciousness. There are Sanskrit terms for these things, which I won't go over, but you could consider it like a computer analogy, that the matter, the material part of our body, the gross physical part, is like the computer hardware. The mental body, which allows the gross physical body to interact with the conscious self, is like the computer software. And the conscious self, the soul, the spiritual element, is like the user of the computer. And there's a lot of evidence for these things. For example, there's evidence for a subtle mental body associated with the human organism that can act in ways that contradict the laws of physics as they're currently understood. Like, mind is something we can't see, but we can detect its effects. Like, air is invisible, but you can observe its effects when it blows over the surface of a lake, for example. You can see waves forming. So similarly, we can't see mind, but there are scientists who have, like Alfred Russel Wallace, who, along with Darwin, was the co-founder of the theory of evolution by natural selection. He was doing experiments with mediums, like he would observe cases of mediums floating into the air, or okay, we're not going to the next slide.
I see that. Why it's not.
Yeah.
Let's go back a little bit. See, hang on. Let's try and get it to go past there.
Okay.
Oh, there we go.
Oh, it went too far. Okay, well, we'll start here. So there have been many famous scientists who've investigated these subtle powers. They're almost like yogic powers that people have. Pierre and Marie Curie, who got Nobel Prizes for their work in discovering radium, were doing research with mediums like Eusapia Palladino, who had psychokinetic powers, the ability to move material objects without touching them. You don't read about that in the textbooks because of knowledge filtration. Okay, now, in more modern times, you have researchers like Robert John and Brenda Dunn of the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Group, who have done experiments with random number generators showing that people can mentally control the output of these random number generators just by mentally willing. They can influence the output. And then there are also remote viewing experiments where people are able to perceive what's going on at remote locations. There are researchers like Stefan Schwartz who have engaged in this kind of research. So beyond that, there's evidence for a conscious self that can exist outside the body, outside the brain. Evidence for this phenomenon comes from medical studies of out-of-body experiences where the conscious self temporarily separates from the brain and then re-enters the same body, becomes associated with the same brain. Of course, that leads to the idea of reincarnation, that a soul can not only leave one body and re-enter the same body, but can leave one body and enter another body and retain memories of its previous existence, as has been studied by Ian Stevenson originally, and now there's Dr. Tucker who's carrying on his research. So in this process of the evolution in this process of transmigration of the soul, there can also be an evolution of the soul through different species, different kinds of bodies, to the human body, and then from there it's possible to go back down. So there's a kind of an evolution or devolution also of the soul. So basically, if we're going to talk about a human being, we have to understand what a human being actually is. And what we are ultimately is beings of pure consciousness. And the cosmos itself is divided in these different ways. There at the bottom, there's a level of the cosmos dominated by ordinary matter, and that's where we exist today. There's another level of the cosmos dominated by subtle mental and intellectual energies, and it's inhabited by beings that people have called gods, demigods, angels. There are all kinds of names for them in different cultures. And then finally, there's the level of pure consciousness, which is where we're originally from, and we're meant to go back there. So this idea of a cosmic hierarchy of beings with three different levels is something that's found in most cultures in the world. Terrestrial level, a celestial level, and a purely spiritual level. So there's a lot of evidence for these different categories. I'll just mention here the work of Dr. John Mack, who was head of the psychiatry department at Harvard University. He wrote in his book, Passport to the Cosmos, "It appears ever more likely that we exist in a multidimensional cosmos. The cosmos appears to be filled with beings, creatures, spirits, intelligences, gods." Now, he got in a lot of trouble at Harvard University for writing things like that. They actually tried to get him removed from his position, but he successfully fought that. I remember meeting him once we were both speaking at a crop circle conference in Glastonbury, England, and we went to each other's lectures and we agreed to stay in touch with each other, but he died in an automobile accident in England shortly after that. And he was walking by the side of a road, and a car went up on the side of the road and killed him. But I'll put this concept of devolution together for you now. As beings of pure consciousness, we originally exist on this high level, the level of pure consciousness or spirit. Some conscious selves come down to the mental and intellectual level, the level of the subtle material energies, and some go further down to the level of accepting gross physical bodies. But it's a process that can be reversed. That process of devolution can be reversed. And okay, originally we're beings of pure consciousness. We can go down to the more subtle levels and then down to the gross physical level. But we can transform ourselves back into beings of pure consciousness. And that's the purpose of different systems of yoga, meditation, contemplation, and prayer. And that's the actual purpose of human life, from which many have become distracted by the forces that are in control of society today, who want to direct our attention to purely material things. The antidote to that is to direct one's attention inward towards the light, the spiritual light. I do that by Hare Krishna mantra meditation, but there are many different systems of transforming consciousness to be found in the great spiritual traditions of the world, including indigenous peoples' worldviews. So these are some of my books: Human Devolution on this topic, My Science, My Religion, and these others as well. So, yeah, I wanted to have something prepared for today, but I really enjoyed speaking with you, Rob, and Omar, when I have a chance to speak with you.
Omar is in the background. He's coming in. He was doing some screen checks. But, Dr. Cremo, one of the things that I love your explanation on is your reasoning for following the Hare Krishna model of what you feel is your spiritual side. Could you delve into that a little bit, in the sense of what drew you to them initially?
Well, initially I received a copy of Bhagavad Gita from some Hare Krishna devotees at a Grateful Dead concert in upstate New York in the 1970s. And I liked the ideas in the book, and I also liked that there was some practical advice about what to do, and that you have to take control of your life, because there are so many things that are competing for our attention. There's the media, the news. I mean, if all the news is talking about a certain thing, then you become fixated on it. And when I could see that yeah, so many things are competing for my attention. And what is the result of giving my attention to those things? It, it seemed to be focused on convincing me that I'm a machine made of matter and that my purpose in life is to consume and produce as many material things as possible in competition with others who are doing the same thing. And it becomes like, well, am I satisfied with that? And to, because, and they were trying to fix my identity in that way that, yeah, I'm a producer and consumer of material things, and certain people profit from that. And, it generates wealth for other people, and they may exploit it in different ways. So I thought I would rather have this other kind of identity that's described in this ancient text. I'm not saying that the Bhagavad Gita is the only place you can get these insights. It just happened to be what resonated with me. But I decided that, well, yeah, maybe it would be good to focus my attention on something that would allow my identity to be less under the influence of these other things. So that's what got me into meditation, to being able to focus on the nature of the self beyond its material coverings. So I think that's what really got me into it, the need to, like I said, take control of my mind and intelligence and focus on the essential self, which then allows me to see others not in terms of their external covering, but in terms of their nature as beings of pure consciousness. And that's because if we don't know who we really are, then we can't act in our own best self-interest. And if we don't know who others really are, we can't act in their best interest. So I think it's fundamental that we arrive at a correct understanding of who and what and where we really are, because otherwise, if we have incomplete or incorrect understandings of our own identity and those of others, we don't really know where we are or where we should be going, we can't orient ourselves properly, then we're just going to become victims, or worse,
Right.
victimizers of other people, other living things, and ourselves.
I love how you describe that too, and there is a balance between, of course, we have to purchase certain items, but if you stand principled in those in that side of your life, it's numbing, it's non-fulfilling, and it becomes this dichotomy that essentially you become eventually the one who's profiting in a way that's not fulfilling. And one of the things we did at an event in the beginning of January, when we were trying to create intentions for this year, was we kind of went into that two roads model where there's this inevitable split that's coming. and the low frequency is one way, higher frequency is the other way. What's your take on that specific type of I think it was the Hopi text, but I think they've talked about it in other areas of the world as well.
Well, basically, there are two types of conscious selves in this material world. One type is trying to understand, I'm a being of pure consciousness, you're a being of pure consciousness, we're all beings of pure consciousness, we're all related on that platform. And as you were mentioning, Rob, yeah, we do have material necessities, that's a fact. But if one is in this group, like trying to understand our real nature as beings of pure consciousness, we would try to figure out ways in which to satisfy our material needs in the most simple, natural, fair, and efficient way possible. And we would find ways to do it without dividing ourselves into competing groups that are in conflict with each other for survival and for control of scarce resources. It's the other type of person is just totally into trying to control, dominate, and exploit the resources of nature to the greatest extent possible in connection with other individuals and groups in competition with them for the same thing. And depending upon which group is more numerous or dominant, you're going to have a particular type of world that you're living in. And we can, I think, see the results of a world that is focused on this other idea that's being widely promoted by the scientific world through its control of education systems. Namely, yes, we're machines made of matter in competition with each other for survival. And you see what the result is.
Well, for sure, we're living in it right now. I think that you're right. There's this symbiosis that the indigenous peoples used to live with on this planet while exploring that consciousness side of themselves and that ability to connect to the planet, but not only the planet, each other at such a greater level. And
And not only each other, but with the whole universe, the whole cosmos,
right,
and what
for
lies
sure.
beyond that even.
Which is incredible. I think that that's incredible. And I think we really need to look back at all of those different teachings and try and bring that back, because that's kind of what this awakening process is all about. It's kind of reevaluating where we are now and saying that this isn't really working. As we can see, there's a lot of downfall on either side of it, and we're losing who we truly are as a species into this level.
See, the difficulty is that on the materialistic side, you think people can be compelled. If you just organize them and educate them, and you can get them to do what you want. Whereas on the other side, you understand it's got to be voluntary. People can't be compelled. It requires people to change something deep within their hearts about their whole attitude towards life and what they're about. So
Absolutely.
it's
very difficult. because
voluntary.
they're not going to want to give up the creature comforts, or they don't want to have to get uncomfortable to be. But see, this is kind of where the path, I think personally, is you may be uncomfortable for a time, but it'll prolong life, as and if we keep going at this rate, we may not be here in 10 years,
Well, it's uncomfortable the other way as well. So,
hmm
uh, but I don't think that life on the path of light is necessarily going to be uncomfortable. Uh, that's I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think if people learn to function in that way, respecting that everyone is a being of pure consciousness, it can be more comfortable than living the other way.
Well, of course. You know what it is that they would feel uncomfortable in the beginning because we would be ripping them away from what they thought was comfortable. It's sort of like like a psychosomatic, uh, where they keep telling you, "Listen, you're comfortable, don't worry about it," but really you're uncomfortable. But then you truly believe that you're comfortable because they keep telling you, like you said with the media. But you're right. Going back to the light is essentially that it wouldn't be the same type of, they would be comfortable. They just wouldn't realize it at first, possibly. I mean, that's really what, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of, people have been so programmed to just feel specific things at specific times when told, and it's, we're really trying to break that paradigm and shed that programming so people like shake them out of it, like wake up,
Yeah.
it's I think we're close. I think we're close to that. I think this is what this event was all about, and I think that, today being the equinox, it's fitting that you're here, Dr. Cremo, and I appreciate you. We enjoy these conversations, and I love when you come through because we get to talk about so much of that aspect of us going down that hill of de-evolution, but now back up that hill of re-evolution. And what do you see for humanity over the next 100 years if we stay on this, not so much the path, but as the collective community stays on a path of trying to reach for that re-evolution? Where do you see them over the next 50 or 100 years?
Well, I think that depends upon the decisions that each individual makes. If we keep going down the current path and we kind of see where it leads to more conflict on all levels of human society, more environmental disturbances, it could go in that direction. And the other direction it could go, there's some positive signs, even in the world of science. Many of them are starting to confront this question of consciousness in a more serious way. They're understanding, okay, we've been trying for 150 years to explain how consciousness can arise from matter in the brain. We were thinking that if matter was arranged in a certain complex way, it will generate consciousness. They haven't been able to show that. So many in the world of science today are turning to what's called panpsychism, the idea that, well, maybe we're going to have to consider consciousness to be a fundamental property of matter or something. And I think that would be a step in the right direction. Actually, I believe the real truth is matter comes from consciousness rather than the other way around.
I agree.
Right. And like the previous Michael Feely was indicating in some of his remarks that I heard, that our whole construct of the material world existing, in its independent three-dimensional state is our mental idea rather than the actual situation. But so I think that's a hopeful sign. And another sign is that most people in the world, according to surveys that I've seen, Gallup surveys and others, show that they have some belief or acceptance of paranormal, what are called paranormal experiences. They appear to be actually quite normal. People have sightings of UFOs, or they believe in reincarnation, or they've experienced some paranormal phenomenon like remote viewing or something. They have all kinds of ideas that contradict what the mainstream elements in the scientific world and education system have been trying to lure them away from for quite a long time. So it's not a very stable situation for those who are dominating the financial and political and economic institutions and power centers that most people don't, if you get right down to it, really don't accept the worldview that they're promoting.
They're on their last leg for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely on their last leg for sure.
Yeah, so there could be some shift in another direction. But as I said, that's every single person who's listening. It's going to depend upon their individual decisions about how they're going to live their lives. And of course, I assume most of the people who are listening in or viewing, they're already moving in that direction or have gone way beyond even what I'm able to comprehend. But it has an effect on the people around them. It may not be immediately visible, but people, if they're presented with options, if they can see, oh, this person is doing this, and then it becomes an option that they begin to consider. They may not take it up immediately, but at a certain point, they realize, well, yeah, I would like to move in that direction. I would like to hang out with people like that or work with people like that. So
you're absolutely right, Dr. Cremo. And we're out of time today. And I just wanted to thank you again. It's always an honor and a privilege to speak with you. And I can't wait to speak to you again, because I feel like off what you just said now, we could do a whole other show about how the ripple effect happens when, you talk to people. But we don't have the time for that right now. But I appreciate you. We love you here at Watchers Talk and Full Spectrum Universe. You're one of our go-tos for information, and we truly appreciate you, Dr. Cremo.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing because, we're part of a community of people who are trying to move things in a certain direction. And we're all making our different contributions. There are researchers and speakers and writers. There are broadcasters, people who are communicating and creating platforms for us. And then there are the people who are listening and being influenced. And actually, any particular individual may be doing all of those things, creating platforms for communication, generating research and writing and lectures that inform and educate and enlighten and inspire people. And then there may be people we may be doing all three things, each one of us. But it's not something that's done alone, and your efforts are also appreciated. And for all of you who are viewing and listening into Humanity Unplugged, you're doing it also. Like I said, you may be doing all three things. So are we off the air? I've lost you, Rob. You appear to be frozen. Omar.
Looks like Rob froze up, Dr. Cremo. Thank you very much. I so appreciate you and the knowledge that you have to share. It is utmost important at this particular time in history when we're trying to create a new timeline and a new way of living than what we have been living, with division and fear and all of that. And we need to move away from that. And your information really helps, shine a light on what we need to be doing and how our ancestors operated and what knowledge can we take from them and apply it into our day-to-day life so that we can create this beautiful timeline that we're all trying to create for our grandchildren and our children. So thank you very much, Dr. Cremo. I so appreciate you and I love you very much. And thank you for your contribution to Humanity Unplugged.